So this is a Trust in Play webinar, and it's a global online event, and it's part of the Trust in Play project, which was funded by Creative Europe Grant last year, and we're running it in collaboration with Goethe Institute in Athens, Amsterdam Design School and Innovatens, as well as EdgeRiders. And me as one of the members of EdgeRiders, I'm responsible for the community management and project management on the side of, on our side of the game design school. So before we will move into physical meetings, and the first physical meeting will happen in Athens at the end of October, and it will be a school for urban game designers that were selected in a competition. We are organizing these informal meetings to kind of feed people with ideas, but also feed the community with new energy and inspiration for urban game design. Also a little bit about the school. So the school is divided into 3 branches. One of the branches is based in Amsterdam, and the leading partner is the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Then the second partner has a base in Athens, and here the leading partner is Innovatens, Technopolis City of Athens and Resilient Athens. And so my name is Natalia Skoczylas, and I'm from the EdgeRiders, which is one of the partners, and I work, as I already said, as a community manager. So we don't, as this nomadic branch, we don't have a physical home. So our home is on the online platform called Trust in Play, where we discuss, plan, and share knowledge and ideas about the games we want to design. So I'm here with Matteo Guzzoni, who you can see sitting in a sofa, and we lead this community endeavor together. So I invited, okay, our guests are here. Tassos, we can see you. Can we hear you?
Yes, I hope so.
Great, yes. Perfect. Okay, so my guests today are Andrea Brasch and Tassos Stevens, whom I invited to talk to us about politics in urban games. So how it will work is that I will start with asking some questions, and then so that you can get to know our speakers and how they approach the topics in their practice. And then I invite you during the conversation to please chip in with questions. So you see the chat on the right side of the screen. Just write whenever something comes to your mind, and Matteo will take care of selecting questions and putting them forward. Okay, cool. So are you ready? Okay, so maybe let's start. I would like to ask you basically to introduce yourself. So tell us a little bit about who are you, what brought you to games, and what kind of games do you do?
Okay, so should I start?
Yeah.
So yes, you already introduced me. I'm Andrea Brasch, and I have been in the game scene for 10 years, about 10 years now, 7 to 10 years. And I guess initially what really excited me about games is that it was a medium where you could actually have an interaction with the players, whereas compared to other mediums like film or whatever. So that was like kind of my initial interest. And then, but from the very get-go, I wanted to do something different with games. I wanted to do something feminist, something political. And I guess slowly that sort of shaped the way I went. And now I run my own game company that's called The Lovable Hat Cult. And I'm also the initiator of the Lust Summit, which is a summit on romance, love, and sex in games. And then I also run workshops for teenage girls to teach them how to make games, and it's called gamegirlworkshop.org. So yeah, so mostly I've also done physical games, but mostly I work digital.
and maybe maybe could I ask you, like, what brought you to the topic of sex and feminism and pleasure and this topic of tackling?
Well, I guess first of all, they're like private interests of mine. And then secondly, there was such a lack of these topics within games. I really had this motivation to see what else we could do with the games medium, because it's like it was so one-sided. I really felt like it was somehow like back when we only had Westerns in film. Like I felt like at some point games were like that. We just do this one kind of games and that's it. And I'm like, oh, but surely there must be so much you can do. Like talking about relationship, about emotions, about all different kinds of things.
Okay, so we will go back to this in a moment, and maybe now I can ask Tassos to give us a short introduction.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Tassos Stevens, and I am one of Coney, based in the UK. I am like sort of artistic director, and then like one of the makers who represent kind of Coney on projects like kind of assembled from a wider network. I'm probably the closest to a founder, and that was Al. But so like I still would sort of say my primary like kind of like kind of catch-all is that I'm a theatre maker, and that's kind of like where I came from. And although if I sort of reflect back on like my sort of before those like first experiments like that were done that we're going to kind of grow into Coney, I did a PhD in experimental psychology, and like that is very like game design in some ways. Like, and I'd done a lot of like tabletop role playing games as a teenager with friends. So there was all these like these experiences which were there, but I didn't really kind of recognize, even like the first stuff that we were making didn't really recognize as games. And the first thing was more what happens if you put in a theatre, you put the audience in a room by themselves, and like the makers are not there. Like, and what happens from that was like the first kind of way in. And it was a couple of years of working like that, and also the idea of like making adventures that would take people on journeys through the world, like unexpected, like what might happen. Before became aware of the idea of like game design as a discipline that kind of existed. And sort of since then, over the last it's been more and more sort of like moving like, and kind of without formally training, kind of recognizing kind of game design is a very kind of key discipline. But Coney, I'd say that the noun that I would use most often is play, to adventures and games. And I've got my own like way of like placing like games kind of on that landscape. In recent years, we've become much more focused around the impact of playing and like what it means to play well, and how like play can possibly spark change, like positive change in people or in systems or in the relationships between those. And kind of like within that, there is like kind of a very like inherently like political aspect to it. And then there's more practice kind of recently that I could talk about that maybe has that there are very political concerns kind of inside it, but I'll leave that for later questions.
Mm-hmm.
Is that good?
You mentioned that what it means to play well. Could you unpack this a little bit?
Yeah, I would give a little salute to Bernie de Koven, and like who I spent some time with like sort of the summer before he passed, and like and his book The Well Played Game, and I think sort of like in some ways like playing well, like we know it when it happens because it is fun for us and for all of us and all the different people who are playing, and that idea that you might change the way that you're playing a game in dialogue with the other people that you're playing with, or you might change the game itself in order, if our aim is to play well together, like, and then it's really like that's kind of in those relationships in that moment, like around the object that is the game, like, so that what that is, how that's framed, how those are said, like, are held, feels that kind of important, but also that the kind of inherently there is like change like happens, like, and will always happen in order to kind of keep that sort of kind of in the moment. And I find I'm very interested in also putting kind of games into like one of the ways that I map it is that play is the frame, and there's a game kind of inside that, but reflection after you played the game is like a super important, is a really important part of like the meaning making. And like even really basically like questions that I like asking, they're useful questions for like starting conversation after any game, you know, whatever it is, however simple and yet just purely fun it is like, what's a moment where you had most fun? What's a moment where you or somebody else played well? What's a tip you would give somebody else who walked into the room, didn't know this game, in order to, like, to help them play well? And there's just those questions are enough for kind of quite profound discussions to like kind of emerge from those, and from all the different answers that different people might have, because different things be fun for different people.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so so I would like to ask you about the political dimension of your work, and this is a big question, so you know, feel free to start it from wherever you feel makes more sense. But like, I would be curious to know if there's something in your biography or your experience, or if there is a history of activism that you have, or like whatever sparked this interest in including politics in your games. Andrea, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start. I guess I've always like been quite, when I was a teenager, like politically active and sort of aware of my surroundings, and I had this urge to try to change things for the better, I guess in the way I saw it to be for the better, like when you're a teenager. But and then I sort of, it was just like I never had this urge to just join, let's say, a game studio and just do games in that way, because that was not what was interesting to me. For me, games are more of a tool to create something, to create change, to convey a message, to make people feel something. So I use it more like an artistic tool, more than like I just wanted to work on some game production just because I wanted to be in games. So in that sense, it's more the overall goal that's like kind of driving me, and then the games is just a medium, an interesting medium, but yeah. So I guess that's just like my personality and what I wanted to do. I don't know if there's like something specific where it was like, oh, this event made me do this, but yeah.
Okay, but there was always this kind of activist and political drive in you. And then once you decided that like education for girls and sexuality and these kind of topics would be important for you, like what was the process that kind of informed the way you work with these topics? Like, could you explain a little bit how did you decide to tackle these big challenges and topics?
Yeah, that's it's a difficult question, because I guess you kind of you find your way along the way in a way. So basically it started out from a point of interest. This is what I would like to do, and then I asked myself, how could I do it? Like, for example, like I had this big mission of, I believe that if there were more like more women creating games, more different kind of people creating games, different people of different colors create these games, then the games we would see out there would also be like reflecting that and be different. So I'm like, okay, so how do you start that? How could you create that change? And that's when I made the Game Girl workshop, because I thought if I can inspire teenage girls to create a game, they have a successful experience, then they might sort of go that way when they choose their career path. And that's the same motivation we had with the Lust Summit, because it was like, okay, we get a bunch of people together to create these different kind of games. We actually show the world that these games can be made. It's possible to talk about these things within games. Then, you know, that might create a community, like a wave, and then let's see where it goes. So what I'm extremely happy about is that those years that I've been in the game scene, I've really seen a huge change. From in the beginning, when I would go to conferences, I would be like the only woman there. Like literally, it was like sometimes when you saw like another woman, you would be like, ah, hi, you know, like
10 years ago.
Yeah, really. And that's just 10 years. And now you go and it's like the scene has changed quite a lot, which is wonderful. You know, it's at least in that sense, it feels like it's going in the right direction.
Then you feel you have an impact as well.
Yeah.
And how about you, Tassos? What was your journey?
My journey, I grew up in a sort of a little bit of a I grew up in like a small town in rural England that was like as conservative as like kind of like possible to be. And in some ways then like defining like myself kind of in opposition like to that when my political consciousness started. But I was always, there was never like a political party that quite matched like what I felt. I mean, the Green Party now is like in this country is probably the closest. I think that a lot of the my own journey as a political person, I think has been a lot through then kind of getting involved in various protests like against the Tories when I was like in Edinburgh, and kind of becoming more of a kind of a sort of on the side like activist, like interested in what was happening in the sidelines. And I think finding, and this is one of the words I was going to say with my practice, finding like kind of huge interest in like in trying to understand like systems in play in the world, and where like one of like my collaborators like David Finnegan has like kind of got this brilliant practice he learned from like environmental scientists about like systems mapping and like mapping resilience in systems and like where change happens, and like thresholds and tipping points, and then using that as a worms in order to like to kind of turn into games, because like games are, as another way to think about like kind of playing well, like systems in some ways, like all of life and politics is about like ourselves in relation to systems that are in play, and like in our relationships with those and with each other, and the different systems that are intersecting, and often systems in the real world are not balanced. They don't play well. Like, so actually like figuring out how to make something which does like, you know, maps that, models that, or some aspect of that in some way, and also understanding the interconnections between different parts of like kind of a much more complex system, understanding your own agency kind of inside that. I'm minded of like a sort of inspirational moment with Paolo Pedicini. We met at a kind of conference in Philadelphia, like, and we were talking about this, and he sort of said, and I've really hung on to this, if you want to learn how to change the world, don't just play games, make games. And in that process of making a game based on actually like where the kind of the bigger impact can like happens. I think in, and also how, sorry, I lost my chain. Yeah, but also like in the making process, like what kind of gets activated. You can think about it in terms of theatre, like, you know, we and because that was my kind of experience kind of growing up as a young person, and now, I mean, Coney does like a lot of work like with young people and like giving them space where they might make things for themselves to meet kind of grown-up audiences as well, which feels like kind of intensely political and important. But yeah, we have these you know, you join a youth theatre and you do a production, and that's half the people. I'm sitting in the theatre right now, and probably like their staff office is just like the other side of the screen. Probably at least half the people, like, you know, got involved with this industry because they fell in love with something, like when they were taking part, like when they were younger. And I sort of think that maybe what we fall in love with is we are in this, like, within a making process. We're in the bubble that is a play space itself. And like things operate suddenly temporarily a little bit differently. We have agency, we have like different roles, and we're all kind of like occupied with like a common goal. Like, this is the thing we want to make, like, and our relationships like change, new ones happen, the old ones grow richer. We learn things and we kind of grow through that. And the experience of that, which I think is such a sort of a powerful like hook, and in a way it's like you want, if more times in like more people's lives it felt like that, because those factors are enabled, that could be an amazing and transformative thing. So that plus I do now sort of do some work, do some work in collaboration with Greenpeace like quite often, and some of our practice has kind of like been adapted to, like, into kind of training for some of their like volunteer activists. And Greenpeace and the Young Conies, our young company, did a collaboration on a protest last year. You've seen the video. I'll put the link in the chat, that I just remain intensely proud of. And I've went to an artist climate lab last year, and I've leveled up, I think, considerably in terms of like thinking about the climate crisis, but also thinking about the people in the room and what's important in terms of like where power sits in that room, and how to make space and how to give space and how to kind of give solidarity for people who are not white men like me, and that's kind of crucial in understanding like room, how we are in play, like is a microcosm of what we need to do in terms of the kind of the bigger existential crisis that we're facing right now. And still a lot to learn on that journey. I had, and I can send a PDF kind of this. I had a kind of a big moment about 4 years ago in the run up to a general election here, just reflecting on how I had shit conversations about politics in my networks, and I never spoke with somebody who was had a different point of view from me, and how political discourse generally across difference especially was terrible. And having had that realization over the course of a couple of swims, which is my favorite way to think, ended up thinking about what the barriers in terms of judgment that kind of get in the way of us being able to open up across difference, and then designed a really simple little kind of conversation game in 3 steps called A Good Question, that was to help make better conversations across difference happen. And that was a good thing in itself at that point, but has also been a starting point for me thinking a lot about how we meet political difference in beliefs, how we understand our own beliefs and our own relation to the world, and currently trying to make developing a lot of practice that may help with that. Well, my internet connection is unstable, but that's just me.
It is, yes. We can hear you most of the time. I don't know, maybe turning off the video would help. I don't know, but it would be, it would be not so nice not to see you. So let's try, let's keep on trying. Okay, you mentioned something very interesting, and maybe this will be something that both of you could address, like the question of agency, and how do we empower people both as they participate in playing games, but also how do we involve them in the process of making? And can we design games that turn into kind of collaborative, participatory maybe practices that have this overlap of, us presenting already something, but then giving enough space and agency to the players so that they can discover their own power, agency, empowerment, let's say, as a process.
Yeah. I'm supposed to go first.
I don't mind going first, but I was giving this for you if you want.
Yeah, I guess we can both reply. It's interesting because I find that to be very difficult. Like we've been like teaching teenage girls like kind of all over the world, and that has been like the big question. It's like, yeah, so we give them total creative freedom to make the games they want to make, but what is that exactly? When you come in as like foreigners and you say, oh, you can make a game about anything you want, of course we gave them like some brainstorming methods and like sort of facilitated it, but then again, there's so many things that come into play when you just give like somebody the freedom to like make what they want. And it's I think it's a really tricky one. And I don't know, it's especially going to like, we've also taught workshops in Denmark where I'm from, and in Sweden, which is more like a similar culture, but like we have been on the West Bank, and there it's like obviously we look very different. Mm-hmm. And just that whole cultural clash somehow isn't that already like setting up like that they're going to do different kind of games than if it had the facilitators had been somebody from their culture. I don't know, it's like maybe you have something on this topic Tassos, because like you facilitate probably more than I do in that sense, but I think it's a really tricky one.
But if I can ask before we move on, like then what are your approaches and strategies to kind of ensure that there is enough creative freedom, and I don't know, like that you create this space where people feel included in a way, or yeah, like they can really express themselves? Like if you could give an example, or I mean, how do you practically deal with it?
We worked a lot with like setting up like to like how we do this method. Now I keep talking about the teenage girls because they're like the ones that are very new to making games and maybe they never made a game before. So in the beginning we're like, oh, you could just make a game about whatever and we'll teach you the tools. And then they just copied a game they saw online. Mm-hmm. Just putting some other things inside. So we're like, okay, that didn't really work. So what do we do now? The next step is, okay, maybe we give them some themes. And then we worked a lot with making some themes that were not too specific, and yet still like open and not like too specific, and that took us like quite a few workshops to figure out like some sort of balance where they could actually like be inspired and yet like express themselves sort of freely or tell their own story, because that was like also our point with the workshops, that exactly like games can be used as a medium to express your own stories. You don't need to copy something. But I think it also depends on, like, there's so many factors playing into this. If you, for example, do the workshop in the school that they normally attend, then it's this kind of it's a specific setting where they're used to doing things in a specific way. They have to do their homework. It's very like disciplinary. So we also found out it's good to do it in a setting that's not their school, but maybe a more free space, which could be like a youth club or a computer room somewhere else, where it's like we go to do something else here, not the normal school setting. And then it's also, we found out it's really important not to have any grown-ups, like teachers or whoever, like their parents present, because that also like restricts them, because then they maybe want to please that person or do something that person would approve of. So there's like all these things we found out along the way, but it's like, I think in each new situation, you kind of have to like assess the situation and say, okay, what are we working with here? And what kind of group is it also? What do they need?
Yeah, and how do you keep sensitive to the needs of groups that are, you know, like people of color, different religions? Do you have experience working with different kinds of groups? And then, you know, are there certain ways, certain differences that you can, you know, mention in a way as an example of how you have to be sensitive and sensible to?
Yeah, I guess for like, we're very concerned about, because we're teaching teenage girls and we want to be role models. We want to show them you can work in this industry. It's possible. So our teacher group is only women. That was like the first very important step for us, because it's like, otherwise it'll be the same story all over. Like your math teacher is a man. So then you think, well, maybe math is not for me, even though I'm good at it, because it's like, it's only men that do math. Like I'm like simplifying it a bit, but for us it was important that everybody on our team is only women. And then we also like try to people of color, like that came as, like when we taught in Denmark, that was maybe not such a big deal, because people are let's say look a bit like the same. Obviously not everyone, because we had immigration, but it's like going to the West Bank, it was like okay, we do look very different. Like, I mean, I'm like white and blonde, and it's like being a bit naive also. It's a long time since we went to the West Bank. There was a lot to reflect upon, like afterwards, like maybe could we have done a bigger effort to have a more diverse looking team, you know, not just white people. But I mean, you learn as you go along. So I would say like the gender thing was very important. And then also now it would also be like, okay, we try to have teachers that also like look different.
Thank you. And you, Tassos?
I'm going to try turning off my video whilst I answer, but shout if it's better to have it on. See, this makes a difference. So everything Andrea said, like, I think is really important. I think, and in some ways, considering like who are the people in the room and what is the room and the space that we're in, like first and foremost, representation really matters. The power relationships like really matter. Like whether there are other people like observing or not, like all of this like is, you know, all those like situational factors and systemic factors are kind of crucial. Like they all make a difference. It's Coney is like one of the reasons, one of the values of it being a network model where different makers like work on different projects, is that it gives us a chance to and continue want to make that network more and more diverse, like in order to better meet the people that we are meeting. I think that's crucial. And then there was two different projects that I might quickly just like talk about that were all quite different, but that sparked something. And I think this is the kind of question of agency and like, and again, what you were saying, Andrea, around like, in some ways the challenge is like, particularly if you're talking about practice in which you have an expertise and an experience, but the people that you're working with might not necessarily have that yet, then it's like you have to, it's quite a long time or different ways you need to kind of just spend to just give them that experience, to immerse them in like, you know, so with the young conies that we work with, like kind of young company aged 8 and 13, like their first entry into, say, making an immersive theatre piece was, imagine it's like a live video game, and enough of them play video games that was kind of a good like framework for them. But it's also then over the last year and a bit, they've been meeting, like taking them to experience different things and talking about that afterwards, and just building up that experience. It's kind of like, it's really important. And then it might take time for them to like have that like start to make things with total creative agency. I think creative agency still exists within, for players of a game that has been designed by other people. Like if there's space for them to be able to do something for themselves in the way that they do something. And I think games where there is a defined goal, but it's open as to how you do it, like often like, you know, lend themselves like to that. Another, our associates, Astrid Briel, she's kind of like a postdoc researcher in audience agency, and she did like her doctorate like looking at a couple of Coney pieces as case studies. And one of the things she picked out was this creative agency, when people something happens that they know that only they could have made it. Some like often like kind of, you know, the kind of most, and these are the moments where they've made something like, it might just be like, you know, in some ways like filling in like, you know, content into like a framework that's been completely designed by the makers, because they filled it in a way that they feel like only we could have done this in this moment now. Like those are the moments that matter the most for players. And also they're often the ones that matter the most for us as makers, the ones that move us the most. Like where it's like, yeah, you did that and only you could have done that, and that's kind of brilliant. I was thinking about as a project called A Lovely Intervention, which is a collaboration with a probation service and working with clients who are offenders, who have been thieves, like in this particular cohort. And they're like, what I've learned as much from this process and this project as like I was taking into it, is how important it is that you are laying out at the beginning, like what, you know, an open like space sort of what, you know, for people to voice, what do you want to look at, like what's important to you, like and then what you do with that, like you've got to take care of it, you've got to leave them in control of it, but then the games that you might play that are helping like to cover around that, maybe those are things that you're giving, and like they don't have necessarily kind of say like what those games are, but you're still responsive and you're looking to like what is it that, you know, how is this working for you, basically, that you know, if you're thinking you
I think Tassos disappeared.
and it's for them to decide what they bring, decide what happens with that, and decide what they leave with, like if that makes sense, even though then the mechanism might differ. And the last one was I thinking about a sort of piece we made with a
Tassos, we cannot hear you. You are muted. I'm trying to unmute you. No, I think you have to unmute yourself, or maybe, okay.
Hello again, sorry.
Okay,
It just crashed. No, I should be unmuted.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, now it's good.
Okay, so we were making a piece of immersive theatre with a youth theatre. We only had 10 days to do it. We only had 3 hours a day with them. And that we made a manifesto with them at the beginning, what the piece is going to be exploring, made that like together. And then we just played with them like through that process, like for the sessions. And then between sessions, me and like the kind of co-director would go away and devise the structures, like, because it was a big kind of improvised piece. So we did that work, they didn't. But we always we brought it back and we pitched it to them. And it was for them then to decide, yeah, this is good, like, and then we will work with this. And because they also recognized that everything we were bringing came from the stuff that they'd done, like we weren't bringing in other things. It was always like finding ways to refine like what we've been discovering through playing together. And what I loved was the points where it crashed, like the first version in the playtest, and then we almost lost their trust. And then we kind of came back the next day with, okay, we've learned from this, and here's what we present as the new structure. And the moment when they were like, okay, so if that's then, that means that means I would do this and this, they were taking it on for themselves, like in the way that they then tested it, that I then felt they had equivalent agency and ownership over it. And basically because like if they didn't like what we were presenting, then we would have changed it. Like ultimately it was up to them. So even though we were the ones with the greater expertise in making those kinds of structures, and just the time that, you know, the limited time, So I think there are different ways to do it where it can be equivalent, but together in the same. You can be equivalent without being the same.
Sorry, Andrea, would you like to maybe respond or add something? I saw you were nodding a lot. Maybe there's something, I don't know, came.
Yeah. I think it's so great, because also what you do that's sort of different from how I work is that you work very physical with people as well. So that's also like, I guess then you somehow also get the feedback quite instantly, right? Is it like working or not? Like what we are doing with them, because sometimes like when you do something digital, it's of course it's different. You can play test on people, but in the end you really like you play test on people and then you watch them play, and of course they play in one way, but if you leave them alone with the game, they will like act completely differently. So I think that must be quite rewarding, that you can, like you said, okay, it broke down, but then we could see it breaking down right there, and then we could go back home and say, how do we change this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes we work with technology as well, and it is more difficult. And it's working with young people. I had a kind of conversation about this earlier, because making things which are interactive, where it's going to be an audience entirely, basically making a game like without an audience to play test it, you're going to get from just playing yourself. And then when you with technology, it's like other people are playing at you, and it's in a different room, as it were, from you. It's getting a larger connection, like something we learn as makers, like over time, and it's definitely a lot easier in that way to be working in a room together, because you have that immediacy. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Connected to that, there is one more question I really wanted to ask about how do you measure impact of this game? So since the impact of your work, let's say, so since they're very big questions and huge ambitions, but also a lot depends on like the chemistry, the settings, your understanding of the context, and a lot of other things, research you're doing, and so on. I think the question of impact is very interesting. So what is impact for you, and also how do you measure it? If you measure it, if you care for it, like what kind of impact do you want to have?
Yeah, I guess like, because I do both these like sort of more activist things, which is festival and workshops, and then I also do my own work, so it's kind of two quite separate things. With the workshops we do with the girls, we do some interviews afterwards and collect the data, and like what was good, what was bad, what did they like, didn't like, and so on, and then we try to make it better the next time, take it into account. And then with the festival on romance, love, and sex and games, it's we did it 5 years in a row, and what I guess the way we could see it had an impact, it really grew. Like we made it with applications, like people had to apply to attend. And then the first year there was like just enough applications, and then like the 5th year we were like just flooded with applications. So that was amazing. We were like, okay, there's actually some people that are interested in these topics, it's great. And people like really formed sort of a community around it and talked with each other and made new collaborations. So that was great. And then we had like, of course, if you release something digital, like we released a game about female pleasure, then of course you get feedback, like you get emails, or people will like write reviews. So that's also a form of a feedback, I guess. But yeah, so quite like different, but I guess it's very important. I think for me, it's more in like those sort of activist community things, the feedback is sort of more important, because in the work that I do from like my own work, I'm a little bit like, if somebody doesn't like it, I actually don't really care, like, because it's my personal work, and that's,
And you, Tassos?
I guess, I mean, like particularly like in recent years with kind of Coney's practice becoming, or some of our practice being quite specifically geared kind of around like, impact and change. And say like take like a lovely intervention, which is like the kind of the pilot project with collaboration with the probation service. We're working with clients where like quite explicitly the kind of the objective of probation is to help these people like rehabilitate from like very difficult circumstances and find a more positive trajectory for their lives. And like we're not the only part of that program, though. It's like we are like, and we're working with a program which is like there's like all different professionals, from like police to psychotherapists, from drug workers to social workers, like, and different professionals are dropped into like meeting clients at particular points. But there's kind of it's interesting, like from still what's a fairly small sample of people, but like I think I've learned a hell of a lot around understanding, first of all, that we can only measure the impact meaningfully longitudinally, as in like with people over time. What is the change in an individual over time? Like not even necessarily like the kind of immediate before and after, but like beyond that. It's really difficult to do measurements which are trying to compare different people, or more standardized like measurement systems, and like and also that you can't make people change in a particular direction. You can only help people change in the way that they want to, and like kind of give and support that. Whatever people want to bring, and kind of the point that they're in, like is kind of crucial. And then we work like in order to sort of like because we're in terms of like the way that work like this is funded, like you have like stakeholders who are like, oh, but like does this mean that people like stop stealing, and like do they get jobs, and like well, I mean, like maybe like it's quite hard. There's a disconnect between like the sort of the very hard like metrics that stakeholders kind of require because they're under pressure to justify like their budgets, but like finding and then in terms of like what you're actually doing, I think that with that project we kind of great learning into thinking about essentially like you need to write a theory of change. Like how do you think that change is going to happen? Like what is the work going to do that will then result in like meaningful changes, whatever those might be. Like in some ways those will be defined for what the work is and for who you're working with. I like very much a framework that I think is like very different research kind of have come at this, but essentially seeing that like what dimensions of people's agency, of relatedness, like your relationships kind of around you, the skills that you have, and like kind of skills for reflection. All this is like really powered by reflection in terms of like how we change, for real in real life. And so looking for designing work like to for the ways to look for those markers, like but you almost need to do like a pre-pilot and then a pilot. The pre-pilot to discover what to just observe and see what might be in play, and a pilot where you lay out a framework of like these are the markers that we might measure, and before you can then run with it. And I'm looking to do that with some of our practice, but also and like towards a lovely intervention, but doing it with like in different contexts. So like worked on like developing like kind of series of reflection games around people's talents and values that will be really useful to take back into probation, but developing it with a group of students. It's easier to work with a larger group in one context, and then transpose the learning kind of and the practice kind of across. This is my background, my past as an experimental psychologist kind of coming to play kind of as well. But I think, in terms of like people's like, the agency relatedness and like their talents, but it's also like, how do you give people agency in their own process of change, like for these clients that we're working with. How do you help them identify the relationships that they have? That's sort of the and you have to design that like for each project, like, and then give space for individual participants to be able to like define what's important for them. Otherwise it doesn't work, and it's difficult explaining that to stakeholders sometimes, but we're trying to find a way to do that. And also something quick, something I mean you experienced this already, Natalia, but like, because I've shared it in Bulgaria, but it's a really lovely in a way, like my favorite like little kind of like demo of like the impact in practice, like and measuring like change in practice, or helping play that like can help make change, as a kind of an exercise I run called the magic trick, that uses at the beginning and the end this like exercise called the magic number, which kind of came from my collaborator with the in the probation, like who manages the probation service, but she also has like a sideline as a therapist. It's one of her exercises where you very simply ask people, how are you, or how well is life playing for you on a scale of 1 to 10. Well, 10 is a miracle and 1 is the opposite, but be precise, like to 1 decimal place. So be like 7.3 rather than 7. And then whatever somebody says, the response is always, that's brilliant, because you're not, say your answer is 7.3, you're not 6.3. Like, so, if your answer is like 3.2, it's kind of like, but you're not 2.2. And then you ask that person, what, just to reflect for themselves, not to share with you, what are the factors in play that mean you are 7.3 rather than 6.3? So what they're doing is they're then starting to define their own scale, like, and then you might also ask them, why are you like 7.3 rather than 7.8? So like reflecting the other way, although the emphasis is always like designed to be positive. And then afterwards, like you might, when you've done the play, you might ask them, how are you now? Like, or what's come from the play that you can apply back to your life as you've mapped it out for yourself on this, like on this trail, and where might change happen. So you're helping people identify that change for themselves. But I think the beauty of that exercise, that it's a scale you define for yourself. How you're defining it, you keep to yourself. That's private. Like, and then you're facilitated to do the work on that for yourself. Like, that feels like a sort of, if I had to pick only one way of measuring impact, I would keep adapting that.
Yeah, that was a really good example, I have to say. Yeah, it worked pretty well. So we have the first question from Matteo, and I wanted to remind everyone that as we're still here, if you have any questions, just please drop them in the chat, and we will ask them to our guests. So the question from Matteo: in this political climate that is really polarized, games can be a powerful tool, but sometimes we create things that are experienced only by people that are already in our community bubble. How do you manage to jump on the other side and expose your work to people that are in the opposite of your political views term? Do you have experiences that you could share?
Yeah, you go first, Tassos. I'm just thinking a bit.
Okay. Yeah, I think basically it comes down to outreach, which is, I don't know if that's a term used in theatre, like, how do you reach out, like, and you need to do work, like you need to do work in order to find ways to bridge and to connect, and that might be about trying to find like people who might be gatekeepers to other like kind of community size bubbles, but where you can bridge to, you have some kind of connection to, work to kind of like gain their trust. Trust is huge kind of in this, and then and then gradually, it takes time, you need to build relationships, like to then be able to start working to like make connections kind of within that group. I'm also sort of like, I mean, the conversation game, a good question. I'll share the PDF like next time there's a kind of punctuation for me. That was like a game in 3 steps, and it was a game about having a better conversation with somebody who's different from you politically. Step 1 is finding somebody who's different who will agree to like have a conversation. It's the hardest step, but the best tips I've got for that is like think of the people that you've got stuff in common with, like family or old school friends or old college friends or neighbors or people who work in the same building as you, like who like you've got that common experience, whatever that might be, that means that there is a bridge, there is some trust, but it's still there's a chat, there's a better chance because we tend to like as people we tend to hang out with people who are, particularly when we live in big cities, we like or on the internet, we hang out with like-minded like groups and bubbles, like communities, but bubbles can start to form. So but there are people we're connected to who are, So I mean, in running a good question, like for myself, I had, I sat down with my uncle, like who is like, of an old like white male socialism. I sat down with an old school friend who's like actually kind of quite close to UKIP. Like, I sat down with somebody who worked in the same building as me, who is I still have like fights with on Twitter around Brexit. Like he's like very much a leaver and very much like no deal. But I think that's really the kind of the way it's separate from, and it is also collaborating with people like again representation matters, and like can you collaborate with people or find people like who can run things who are like groups backgrounds, like when we think of that in terms of like a positive intersectional solidarity, but it's also applies to like across difference and division.
Yeah, I think like it's also like what you do is, I guess it's very physically based in one space. So of course it's a different kind of outreach you have to do. I was just thinking about if we release something like a game in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, of course it depends on then the advertising you do for that game, like who it will reach, and it might reach somebody who like is very different from who has very different political views from your own political views. So that's, I guess, the positive. But in this more physical realm, like in the festival we did, like we were actually really thinking about how to deal with that, because of course there are people that want to do the same kind of games that we want to do and play those kind of games, but then we would just be inviting all our friends, or people that are somehow connected to us. So we actually tried to look in the games industry. Like the first one we did, the first festival was in Copenhagen, and then try to invite some people from different game companies that we knew would not attend this kind of festival. If we hadn't like gone specifically for them and said, oh, don't you want to join? It would be great if you could be here. Like somebody, you're professional, and it would be great to have you. And that actually, and then we created in the festival, they create a game prototype within 48 hours. So it's a very typical game jam kind of setting. And so we created the groups also. So we would place like different individuals together that we thought would have something in common, but might also have like some conflicts. And then we were facilitating, and we saw how it went, and often quite interesting. And often like the outcomes were like very different than what we like had expected. So, but it's a good question, because I think it is so easy also just to stay in your bubble, because there's a lot of people in that bubble, right, already. And then how do you actually like jump that barrier?
I was just thinking as well that there is also, I think there is a question in terms of like starting points for work, like like some of the starting points that we might float within Coney like start with can be like, what is this about? Like, what do we want to explore? But it's also kind of question like, who is it for? Like, who are we making this for? And where can it happen for most impact, and like, or including like best reaching them. And I think it's just really useful, without there being like right or wrong answers to those questions, just that we ask those questions of ourselves as makers, like because that helps us avoid like otherwise like blind spots, or kind of systemic barriers, maybe, like just to sort of like be just and have that always at the foreground when you begin the work, as much as like when it's like finished for release.
Thank you for these insights. We have one more question from Mark, who's asking: politics in games, there is power, there is ideology. How do you avoid a sort of moral grandstanding and value signaling? Is it even a thing to be avoided? And also, what is the balance of fun, enjoyment, and purpose?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit like if you talk digital games, it's like again, that's also like a very tricky one, because if you want to make a game that's actually engaging and that people want to play, often it is also because you have taken a standpoint. Like I do not believe that anybody can do something that's just neutral, because what is neutral? It doesn't really exist, basically, because you create out of like from where you come from where you grew up, from who you are. So of course you can, there's a lot of things you can take into consideration when you create a game. Like right now we're working on a game a digital game that we'll release in the beginning of the new year. And in that game we have our main character is a circle. And by purpose, we have not given it a gender. So you don't know what gender it has. And that was very purposefully, because we wanted like different players to be able to identify with the circle, and it shouldn't, so we don't refer to it as he or she. But actually something like I was thinking about that came out from our festival that I also like, that nobody ever really thinks about, is like, I think how much politics are around the technology that we work with. Like the game controllers, the screens, the way they are designed. Like we had one game being made in one of the first festivals, which was the game was quite simple. It was like sort of these abstract patterns, but then in order to, and you had to match them to be like perfectly overlapping on the screen. But then in order to do that, you needed to use all the controllers on your Xbox controller. So actually the game demanded 2 players to play together with 1 controller. So of course this results in the 2 players doing like this with their hands, using their elbow and actually getting physically quite close, like with this 1 controller. And I just thought that was like so interesting, because it really used the technology, the physical technology to create some intimacy. So yeah, now I got a bit like off track, but I just thought about this. But it's a very interesting question, because of course, like I guess as a living human being, you have a standpoint. Like nobody is neutral. So as you said, Tassos, as a maker, that somehow it will influence what you do, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, in some ways, like being transparent as possible about like, where you're coming from is important. And also, I mean, depending on what you're making, but like, partly I think that making a space where everybody like feels that they like, however they choose to play, and like you are entering like a play space, like it's not the same as the real world. And like one of the kind of the values of a play space is it gives like a space in which we can try out scenarios, we can try out ways of being which might not be our own, and discover something and like learn something like that from that. But and you have to, I think more generally in terms of to kind of to help people participate, you have there can be it's difficult to have judgment inside the kind of that space. Like you have to be able to like as something, we a piece of playing theatre we made called Small Town Anywhere, where 30-odd people become the citizens of a small town, play at the most momentous week in its history. I mean, like a LARP, before I knew what LARPs were. And there's something that, the historian who was the gatekeeper to the town, kind of said that was kind of crucial, is like, we're here because you're invited to be the citizens, so we can discover what will have happened in the history of this town if people like you were the citizens. And if it turns out, that you make a speech that averts the world from plunging into war, then that's what will have happened. If you get drunk and fall asleep and spend most of the day in a drunken slumber, that's also what will have happened. And all of this will be, it will be valuable because that means we know what will have happened. And how do you make everybody feel okay that whatever they do is okay? I think it's also, I just talk about sort of another game, a simpler game than Small Town. I'll just talk about Small Town. What happened over the course of that week is that we've set things so that sorry, oh, you got me? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
we set up so that there are two tribes in the town. There's just like a divide between the kind of the locals and the newcomers, and other things to stir up division, and it kind of models a kind of a rise of fascism, and the town is tested and it's basically will they be individually or collectively kind of heroic, and I think what happens when people play very differently or even darkly, and a very good friend of mine who can played one night, and he's a game designer himself and a brilliant player, and he won every single game, as it were, that was going inside the space, ended up as the mayor of which was kind of his objective from the outset, but also ended up presiding over a kind of a cleansing. It was one of the darkest turnarounds that we had. And then what was really important was that the kind of the debrief, the decompression space that followed, and giving everybody the space then to kind of talk about what had happened and how I think. And actually, thinking back to the recent game that I was going to talk about, which I'm not, but we could have done better there in terms of, asking questions, facilitating that a little bit, so that people could talk about what they'd done that they believed in, and what they'd done that they felt very different, from them, from their own beliefs. Because he came out with I know I made every single decision, but I don't know what I just did. That's was a little. Was quite terrifying, and it took him a while to work through it, and he wrote something very beautiful kind of about his experience kind of inside it much later, which he published, which was but I think in some ways that I think the sort of the I don't know within the kind of kinds of often the kind of games that we're making, that there's quite a free space for people to explore and to play differently, and that's important. And it's less than about, and because you can't judge what people do, as long as it's within safety and consent, and the basic stuff bodies in that space, which is a different matter, but within the fiction, and you're responsible for everything that happens inside that kind of as well. It's less about moral grandstanding. It's more about making space where different people can play, but then also to reflect afterwards about what that meant, and and to bring that back then for themselves into how they want to into the real world.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. I hope, Mark, you're happy with the answer. So not to keep you too long, I have one last closing question, and that would be, if you could name one thing that really inspires you, a person, a game, an experience, something that, you know, you really want the world to know about, then what would it be?
Oh, that's a big question.
Maybe I can ask you later to compile a whole list, but like on top of your head.
Yeah. Tassos, you can totally go first on this one because I'm thinking.
I decided, but my screen just startled the other people in the office next door. If I was in an audience that was like not like, I imagine like game designers or kind of engineers, I would still say Bernie de Koven. Like, and the time and the exchange that I spent with him a couple of years ago, like, has been like massively influential on my practice and on me as a person as well. Like, so much that I can owe him, and it's lovely to a sort of social design, like kind of group who hadn't heard of him, and it was lovely to be able to share that. And you know, sort of, I think, yeah, I think like to a room full of game designers. I think in some ways, like I'm certainly constantly inspired by, and I kind of I did a little kind of symposium thing a while ago, talking about, I'm often just inspired by what people do, what people choose to do inside like these kind of spaces, like these spaces that we make within small town. There were like moments where, you know, individuals would would stand up, were heroic in a way that it was really like there were people like spontaneously were forming lynch mobs and like screaming for people to be strung from the trees. Like this is how hot it went. And like when people would and there's nobody else in the room but that audience. There's no other like authority for them to look at. They hear it, there's a voice of a town crier. That's it. Like, and when people would stand up to that and would play their way through, it was so kind of incredibly moving. Like, and see really like what people can do in, and when people can be extraordinary, like, I think is incredibly moving. Like, I'm really inspired by the young conies, like, as a group of young people. And I mean, maybe more generally, like right now, and on this day where people are marching, like in other cities kind of around the world, like how that generation has kind of risen to the mess that's been left by us. I think it is more generally like how people who are particularly who don't have privilege are just fighting the fight. I think that's is the most inspiring thing, really.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to mention like a specific game, or in that sense a specific thing that like super inspired me, but I would say that I'm very much like of a maker. Like I like to initiate things, to create things. So in many ways, personally, I'm very inspired by, I have like a lot of academia friends within also researching games, and that is so inspiring for me to talk with them, because they put a lot of things into words that maybe I somehow have the sense of, or I have in my mind, and then they put them into they make it make all sense to me, and I'm like, oh, that's what I'm doing, or this is why this is like that. So I guess somehow being friends with somebody that's like within your field, but still like different from yourself could be like quite inspiring. And then also, like you said, Tassos, that you had these experiences with somebody that you made, like that you made the games with, or that participated in your game. And I also like when we did like some of these workshops with the girls, it was also like just so inspiring to see how proud they were after this 5 days super intense like making of a game. And then like just they were just beaming with like, I made this game, you know, you can play it, you press play and you can play my game. And they were just so proud. And a lot of them were like, oh, I didn't know if I should have signed up for this, but now I'm so happy. That was very like super cool. It was like, I thought, oh, I wish I had that experience when I was a teenager. I wish somebody would have facilitated that for me, you know. And it's like I get very inspired by literature as well, like, and other forms of art that make me think about something in a different way and that I might include in my own work. But yeah, I don't know, like, are you looking for something very specific, Natalia? Or that was like the...
No, it was just a nice closing question, I think, and it's always good to share people we admire. And maybe a legacy of play, Tassos. This is Bernie's website, or that's something else. Maybe you can also share Bernie's name.
Yeah, it's there. I put it in the chat, like just above. If you read out the messages.
Okay, all right, Bernie. Sorry, yeah, I just okay, I missed it. Great. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you very much for making time. Thank you, Mateo.
No, that's so cool.
It was a great pleasure to have you. Yeah. For the rest of you, we're meeting on the 9th of October. You can check on the Trust in Play platform for the time and the topic. It will be about safety and consent in games. And yeah, thanks so much for participating on a Friday evening. Have a wonderful weekend, and yeah, see you later. See you next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Ciao.